Alright, welcome. We got lots of Alien Earth news coming out. Yesterday we had a brand new trailer called Greener World, I think if I remember rightly. And then there was another interview, which was over on Collider. I did a video on that. And there was some quite key reveals actually in that trailer. I did a video on that as well, on the plant alien. Yeah, that's right, there's a plant alien. Quite fascinating, quite an interesting take. I mean, you're crossing the stars and the galaxies. I mean, why would you not pick up a alien plant? Makes sense. One of those things we don't often consider, really, I guess. But interesting. Now, here is an interview / article on comicbook.com. And it's all about Noah Hawley teasing what to expect from the series. And it's quite an interesting piece. And because obviously we're fast approaching now. This is going to be released on August 12th. August 13th if you're in the UK. Boo. To you guys getting it first in the States. Quite frustrating, but never mind. So we're going to get lots more information. So I thought we'd dive into this today. Please do hit subscribe if you're new here. I had really good success asking you guys that are not yet subscribed to, hit subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content. So thank you so much for that. And I've just got to say, obviously, we still have about 50% of people that are not subscribed. So, be good if you could. If you want to stick around a little bit longer, I guess. Hit subscribe. So, let's take a look. So, like I said, this is an article / interview over on comicbook.com. And yes, this did drop yesterday, but I did 7 videos yesterday. It was quite a lot. And then it just got too late. And so, yeah, we're here covering this now. So, Alien Earth creator Noah Hawley teases what to expect from his ambitious new spin-off. So, filmmaker Ridley Scott changed the entire landscape of both sci-fi and horror in 1979 when he released Alien into the world. Nearly 50 years later, many audiences still consider that debut entry the benchmark by which to measure all successes, which is true. The franchise has expanded in various ways since then, including sequels, cinematic crossovers, comic books, and video games, but Alien is about to head into uncharted territory with its first live-action TV series. And actually, that can't be stressed enough. This is pretty major for the franchise, and if this is successful, that's great news. In terms of the franchise just living on. It's brilliant. It's huge news that it's going on TV. But anyway, let's scroll through here. So, here is his first kind of commentary. Those first 2 movies, which are really my bellwether that I'm going against, good. Because those are the benchmarks, right? For different reasons. So, good. The first one is such a 70s movie, and the second one is such an 80s movie. I think that's fair. Hawley shared at a press event in which Comic Book was present regarding his approach to the project. Quote, the first film, really, Space Truckers, it has that blue collar. These are people who work for a living. The second film, they're grunts. Technically also work for a living. You introduced Paul Reiser, but he's middle management at best. I wanted to keep some of that identity, which we get in through Alex. This is Alex Lawther's character, Hermit. And the grunts that he's with. Now, Alex Lawther plays a military medic, and also the brother of Wendy. So Wendy is the hybrid creature, hybrid human, synthetic hybrid thing. So there's some interesting dynamics there. I also felt like we had to see now what the level above is, and so the trick was to try to figure out how to show the elite while still holding that tone of voice. I also feel like that first movie with Yaphet Kotto and Harry Dean, I probably butchered that, but never mind, Harry Dean Stanton, it's a little bit waiting for Godot. We're going to a place, we don't know where, to do a thing, we don't know what, for people we don't know. There's a little bit of that individual getting lost in the system that I think is a big theme for us. Why is that specific to do with Yaphet and Harry Dean Stanton? Weird. I think that's quite odd, but never mind. They were great characters, and I enjoyed their play off one another, all about their bonus. Very cool. Anyway, so FX officially describes the series, quote, in the year 2120, the Earth is governed by 5 corporations, Prodigy, Wayland, Lynch, Dynamic, and Threshold. In this corporate era, cyborgs, humans with biological and artificial parts, and synthetic robots with artificial intelligence exist alongside humans, but the CEO of Prodigy Corporation, basically makes hybrids, which I think is interesting. And so you're going to explore that effectively, which I think is quite interesting. So it says this: while certain elements of the big screen franchise have depicted the priorities of massive corporations largely in how disposable they perceive human life, Hawley is diving even deeper into these realms, which I think is actually quite interesting, because if you're viewing it from the perspective of Prodigy Corporation doesn't technically view human life as disposable, views it as a stepping stone, because it's trying to move and push forward with human existence with the hybrid, so he can live forever and also sell a product at a high market. So he kind of views humanity as a stepping stone, I believe, which I think is quite interesting. So anyway, he said the following, quote, "I don't think that in the 80s and the 70s they could have envisioned the Elon Musks of the world at that point. We're in a different era, and I felt like in order to make it feel contemporary, we needed to address that idea that this whole thing is the whim of Prodigy, and what you get in a corporation is a diffused decision system where nobody actually decides. It's nobody's fault, and therefore it doesn't have to be a human decision. I think what we've reached now is something worse in a way, which is that I think about that Twilight Zone episode where there's the kid who has all the powers and everyone around him has to act like all they want to do is make him happy and keep him happy. There's something so awful about having to please someone who doesn't have the rational view of the world or is subject to whim. I think that's the spin on it that we brought to it. The Weyland-Yutani side is more of that corporate identity." I mean, that is quite interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So the Alien franchise is deservedly known for birthing one of the greatest movie monsters of all time with the Xenomorph, and while the iconic creature is set to make an appearance in Alien Earth, much like how Ridley Scott returned to the franchise for the 2 prequel films and dove deeper into the world's mythology, those beasts are just the tip of the iceberg. Quote, "When I do these adaptations, which I've been asked to do a couple of times now, I just try to figure out what the original made me feel and why, and then try to make you feel similar things while telling you a completely different story. When I look at that first movie, it's not just a monster movie. It's about humanity trapped between the primordial parasitic past and the AI future, and they're both trying to kill us. To the degree that it's a TV show, it's multiple hours of a story. Even if I have 60% of the best action or horror on TV, I still have 40% of what are we talking about." I think that's quite an old quote, actually, but okay. Unless he's just repeating himself. "I like the idea of picking a moment in Earth's history, which is a bit like the Edison, Tesla, Westinghouse moment, where everyone knows that electricity is a thing and everybody's fighting to control it. So I like this idea that we have artificial intelligence. Everyone's trying to figure out how humanity transcends to the next level. Artificial intelligence, is it enhancing the human body mechanically, or is it this transhuman idea? That felt like a really interesting conversation to have. To then bring the monsters into it, because the show and a lot of science fiction is really about the idea of, does humanity deserve to survive? If you remember, Sigourney Weaver in the second movie, she's like, at least they don't F each other over for a percentage. So to be able to bring in not just the physical or the body horror, but to bring in that moral horror of humanity, the things that we do to each other was really a driving force. That is an old quote, actually, but interesting nonetheless. So yeah, talks a little bit about this stuff, about the Xenomorph. It's the dynamic of what makes something cinematic. It's the moment that you add in the visual storytelling of horror and action. You're expanding the amount of time it takes to shoot these things, and we have some very big set pieces that require a disproportionate amount of our shooting schedule compared to the amount of screen time. You just have to work all that stuff into it. Certainly in the design phase with Weta, I didn't want to mess with the silhouette of the creature at all. I felt like the audience wants that classic creature, but then within that, I felt like I wanted to experiment with a couple of ideas about the creature and ways in which, and just trailed off, because I always felt like it was the least effective when it looked like a guy in a suit. There are elements in the classic, there's just a big ribcage, which feels very human to me. I wanted to try to minimize that and play around with some ideas. That's a very fun process to work on with Weta, but the facehuggers, I don't want to mess with that at all. You want that to fit to the original, and then there are some coloration issues with what color it is. It's very black in the movie. I wanted to play into more of the bug-like quality, so maybe it falls a little more in the roach coloration. You can get in trouble for keeping it the same, and you can get in trouble for changing it. So I figure I'll just be in trouble for whatever. kind of true to a degree. But also, I mean, it's been roach colour before, so that's fine. Some of this stuff I've kind of repeated in a previous video, but that's not too bad. So Alien Earth marks the first time in the franchise not only being the first live-action, a long-form TV show set in this world, but it also marks the first time an entire adventure unfolds on Earth outside of the crossover Alien vs Predator. None of us have ever been in space. I think what Ridley managed to do in the first film was create a workplace that we could identify with, because it might as well have been a factory for all that we knew on the inside. That made it recognisable and very different than Star Trek's Apple Store aesthetic, or even the Star Wars just ripping yarn adventure tale. It felt real. Everything was dripping. It was rusty. It just felt real to us here on Earth. Also, one of the things that all the movies share in common is that they're all trapped in a spaceship prison, and I wanted to expand outside of that. You have to have layers of containment, but you also, by expanding the purview of it, you expand the risk of it as well. Because we know that to go from just a small outbreak to a global phenomenon can happen very, very quickly. So that's interesting. And then not a whole lot of interesting stuff here with this element. Talks about, making audiences angry and things like that. Here are the characters you love, and I'm just going to tell you new stories about them. And my hope was that everyone would be so happy to have news stories that they wouldn't be as angry. I do have a friend who worked on Star Trek shows who said, nobody hates Star Trek more than Star Trek fans. You just have to manage it. But it is a very different audience, and certainly a different audience than Legion. Also, in a way, it's a very different story with its own tone of voice. Blah, blah, blah. Not really that important. Now, it does also say this. So the franchise as a whole has largely focused on adult characters, given the nature of how they find themselves in terrifying scenarios. So, what's the issue with this? With the consciousness, etc.? And he just says this: we're also playing a lot with the idea of children and adults and what it means for a child to become an adult. If you take a child's mind and put it in an adult body, that doesn't make it an adult. And so much of that process for growing up is biological, it's hormonal, and the physical restructuring of your brain. And so you have to simulate adolescence in some way. That's interesting to me in terms of the 40% of what we're talking about. Also, having a now teenage daughter, the process between girlhood and young adulthood on some level. There's either a desire to grow up too fast or a reluctance to grow up. So some of this stuff's actually quite interesting. We're just talking about, essentially saying that it is exploring the human condition. And I think that's fascinating. So there you go. I don't have anything else really to say. That's effectively the bulk of the interview from the set. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. Take care. Bye-bye now.